Hey, Satanico here once again for God Loves Comics, and this is the GLC review of Cormac McCarthy's The Road as adapted by French cartoonist Manu Larcenet. I have the hardcover edition here with this beautiful dust jacket. It is $26.99, 160 pages from Abrams Comic Arts, which is, of course, an imprint of Abrams books. If you break small promises, you'll break big ones. Cormac McCarthy. I read Cormac McCarthy's The Road back at a time when I was nearing the end of my patience for reading novels. As people age, they slow down, but mentally, my pending mortality and the death of my pre-internet existence has sped me up. It made me too impatient to focus on either the sprawling prose or the glacially paced cinema, like, say, Farewell My Concubine or Lust Caution, two films I enjoyed to varying degrees in the distant past. This is not to say that The Road is particularly sprawling nor a difficult read. McCarthy's prose is often only somewhat less Spartan than Hemingway's and as pragmatic as Elmore Leonard's. It's along the lines of Paul Bowles. If Bowles ever injected compassion into the objectivist worldview of his fiction. The 2009 film adaptation of The Road, directed by John Hillcoat and screenwritten by Joe Penhall, was paced as well as could be expected, considering a concept based on the uncomfortable dichotomy of survivalist desperation and lethargy. Somehow, Hillcoat created a world of foreboding despair without stooping to making a major feature of the cannibalistic savages left roaming McCarthy's fractured and disheveled landscape. Like Jaws, the fear was mostly existential but off-panel. Unlike Jaws, there was little or no monster movie payoff, and not even the magnificent raccontourism of a quaint shark tale. This may explain why The Road was destined for box office mediocrity, taking in only $27 million globally, barely breaking even on its scant budget. But quite unlike the film-going masses, it was this distinct lack of narrative contrivance and forced action in McCarthy's novel that French cartoonist Manu Larcenet found so alluring. In a letter written to McCarthy asking for permission to adapt the novel, Larcenet stated, quote, "I love The Road for the atmosphere it creates, most likely because I enjoy drawing the snow, the chilling winds, the dark clouds, the sizzling rain, tangles and snags, rust, and the damp and humidity. I draw violence and kindness, wild animals, dirty skin, pits, and stagnant water," unquote. Larcenet must surely be the first comics artist to take on an adaptation due to his love of drawing stagnant water and humidity. His interests, however, align with McCarthy's ability to extract poetry from such a stark landscape. No car chases nor climactic battles are required. Larcenet simply matches McCarthy's prose via his own poignant and brutalist art. Larcenet expressed his interest in adapting The Road from the view of an artist. But in testament to his brilliance, he also maintains a conceptual view of The Road's crucial elements. In a brief interview on the McCarthyist site, Larcenet said, quote, "I wanted to keep the feeling of immobility, of heaviness, sometimes even of boredom. The characters walk, sure, but they don't go anywhere," unquote. Lesser creators, inured to decades of consuming genre constructs, would inevitably desire to punch up the story with more action, more contrived character growth, and of course more focus on nomadic bands of cannibal rapists. But Larcenet intuits McCarthy's greater threats of isolation and environment. The savage road agents are to be avoided at all cost, but they can indeed be avoided. However, the chilling cold, the choking ash, the gnawing hunger, and the sprawling haze of isolation simply cannot be. They are the ever-present and most malignant villains of The Road. The father and son go nowhere because there are no true destinations left. There is a broken and brittle landscape in the aftermath of a nuclear destruction. And also in the aftermath of that aftermath, in which the surviving humans have picked clean the few useful remnants of a dead world. Cinemas and restaurants are defunct or decimated. The few bastions of potential sustenance are former depots of travel and civilization, gas stations and truck stops that may offer a stray can of soda rolled under a counter or precious drips of fuel for a lantern. In this landscape, an unopened container of Pringles or of instant ramen would be the equivalent of manna from heaven that closed for business eons ago. But in a world without running water or microwaves, a cup of ramen simply unlocks a new quest: water and something to boil it in, over an open fire that may lure hostile company. Larcenet's focus on atmosphere is both astute and unavoidable, as it is where McCarthy's novel excels. The prose serves up a visceral sense of the grime and stench of perpetual homelessness, the almost noble resignation and daily thirst and hunger that will rarely or never devolve into the gluttony of the recent past again. Where other McCarthy novels like Blood Meridian delve deep into the disturbed and unsettling human psyche, The Road's central character is the psyche of an entire destroyed world. It's hard to imagine a more succinct yet poetic sentence to establish both visual and emotional tone than McCarthy's description of a daily gray haze that never opens to the sun. Quote, like the onset of some cold glaucoma dimming away the world, unquote. Larcenet opens his adaptation with a full page of foreboding clouds, dust, and haze yawning from the ground up to the sky. All four panels, both horizontal and vertical, are nothing but cross-hatching and woodprint-style scratchboard that resembles a less orderly Eric Drucker. Each panel offers a corner of blemished white space representing the tiny windows of the still visible world as it might have been before the haze, before the fall. By page 2, Larcenet, still not satisfied that he's made his point, offers up 2 more panels of amorphous haze, followed by a dominant large panel of white-flecked blackness. Even the dark can't be fully cleansed. Confined to a horizontal panel at the bottom quarter of the page, we at last see a glimpse of humanity, all but crushed beneath the amorphous maw, asleep under a lean-to. On the following page, Larcenet continues to revel in his reconstruction of McCarthy's bleak landscape by showing what the father sees through a pair of binoculars. Larcenet offers a perfect 8-panel grid of ruin porn. Slumping electrical poles, skeletal silhouettes of buildings, and denuded trees from which you can almost envision the hanging body parts of Goya's casualties of war. After this cruel opening of atmospheric gloom, it is only by the 4th page that Larcenet allows his characters, the nameless father and his nameless son, to speak. There is a hint of warmth in the cold survivalism as the boy says, "Hi, Papa," and the father assures him that he is nearby. But after that, there is the simple reality that it is cold, and they must keep moving south if they are to hope to survive. Larcenet lets his characters fall silent again. The sense is there's not a whole hell of a lot to talk about, other than whatever plan of action is necessary. Also, talking expends energy in this world, energy in all its forms, be it fuel, electricity, or the internal energy a human needs to keep walking, are all in desperately short supply. Both man and boy are imbued with world-weary expressions that are both painfully obvious and yet so naturalistic as to still be subtle. Larcenet is too good to need any manga-style hyper-expressionism to taint his approach. Like so much of the book, the final panel of page 5 conveys the story while also being suitable for framing. It is merely a long shot of an angular overpass, 2 leafless trees almost like gnarled claws on the other side, and the tiny silhouetted frames of father, son, and their small ramshackle of gear, heading off into the distance. The road is just beginning, but amid the haze, the only clarity is that happy trails do not lie ahead. Larcenet frequently uses his long shots and minuscule silhouettes of father and son, both to lend a sense of scale and to also emphasize the all-encompassing isolation felt by the characters, thus transferring it to the readers. When father and son see the dead husk of gas stations and convenience stores, it initially appears to be a misstep by Larcenet to show these 2 starving, worn-down humans running across the expanse of a panel. Why would they expend the energy to race from forest edge to crumbling human constructs that are likely denuded of any remaining tools for survival? However, You realize that Larcenet's long shots of the two running shows the need to not stay exposed in the open for any length of time. Summoning the energy for a brisk run to cover is required, lest they be spied on a slow trudge by whatever predators are out there. Once inside, the son spies his father holding a landline wall phone to his ear. Of course, the father knew there would be no dial tone, itself a sound so antiquated it would flabbergast the cast of teens react. But like all flawed humans, he still hopes against hope. Hopes for a lifeline to another human being and to some remnant of civilization. Of course, the line is dead. When father and son exit the crumbling store with a strand of gas cans, Larcenet cuts to 8 canisters hanging upside down from a tree so skinny it bends under their weight. Each canister is empty save for equally scrawny droplets lingering in their dark recesses. In a black and white book for a black and white world, Larcenet allows himself the conceit of indicating the light of a lantern with the faintest of fiery hues. But make no mistake, even flames in this world are timid and depressed. While so much of the emotional content of McCarthy's prose is conveyed in Larcenet's artwork, the scant lines of dialogue he allows to bleed through have maximum impact. "What would you do if I died?" the boy asked. "If you died, I would want to die too," his father says. "To be with me?" "Yes." In a world as stark and hopeless as a mouthful of ashes, fashioned by an author who routinely gut punches sentimentality, a glimpse of warmth in the slivers of humanity are enough to warm even the blackest heart. A few pages later, Larcenet will almost repeat the image of those dripping oil cans. Only now blood drips from the father's nose in droplets no more plentiful than those from the oil canisters. In a world of so little clarity, it is clear that the father, whose sole remaining purpose is to guide his son safely through this world, is operating on borrowed time. To convey this, Larcenet delivers 2 panels as haunting as anything I've seen in comics. As the father snuggles the son for warmth, both trying to sleep through the misery of the cold, we see the father's eyes as wide as they've ever been, wide with terror. The second panel pulls back from the extreme close-up to show the father's hand desperately gripping the filthy blanket his son is swaddled in. His eyes are still filled with the same degree of horror. Visually, it's a classic comics trope dating back to the Golden Age. In fact, it looks little different than an image you would often see in a heavy-handed EC or Atlas horror or war title. However, the father is not awakening to a rotting corpse or the dripping bayonet of an Axis soldier. Instead, his terror comes from the realization that he is dying and the son he loves, the son he keeps warm, will be left alone in this world before he is old enough to fend for himself. It's enough to keep even a terminally exhausted man awake at night. When man and boy cautiously enter a city of crumbling buildings and pedestrian overpasses, the boy spots a desiccated corpse sitting slumped against a building. In truth, the corpse probably looks no more dejected and hopeless than its previously living occupant. Father warns his son about letting such haunted images animate his mind. When the boy asks hopefully, "You forget some things, don't you?" his father replies, "Yes. You forget what you want to remember, and you remember what you want to forget." Just a page later, they pass another corpse with hollow eye sockets and broken teeth invaded by vines. But immediately after, we see the rarest of commodities in the road: joy. The father allows the boy to ride atop their shopping cart as it rolls speedily down a hill, and for a brief moment, the boy is allowed to act his age. For a brief moment, the cold, the hunger, and the perpetual decor of corpses are forgotten. However, on the facing page, father and son are caught in a rainstorm, and reality bites back once again. The shopping cart, bogged down in muddy ash, is now a terrible burden to be pushed and pulled by its weakened owners. Across the wordless expanses, Larcenet's storytelling remains flawless, and his stated love for drawing elemental factors that other artists might view as toil is evident. Larcenet draws fierce rain striking ash-encrusted earth with a force that creates a steady EKG reading of white splatter across a horizontal panel. In the next panel, he scrapes his silhouette with a razor for very fine straight rain. Then there is angled blowing rain, soon followed by a fine rain cleansing a cabin that looks like a Bob Ross still life. Far from the shelter they hope for, the cabin instead holds yet another grim vision. This time at least, the father is able to shield the horror from his young son, whose head is filling fast with the sort of memories he wishes he could forget. Along the journey, Larcenet clearly takes his own joy in drawing small forgotten treasures amid his beloved ruin porn. Those treasures are of classic Americana with wonderful old made-up brands like Little Hobo, red beans, and pork, and a can of soda with a polar bear icon emphasizing that it is, quote, ice cold. A later discovery of cans of tuna reads, lowest mercury of any brand, as a label selling point. Larcenet gives these discoveries a splash of color that almost shines like an LB Cole cover in the midst of this oppressive palette. This makes the discoveries almost as much a treat for the readers as they are for the characters trapped in this frigid world. Opening the soda for his son, the father only smells it to remember the aroma of carbonated preservatives and sugar. Then he hands the full can over to the boy, telling him to remember the taste. The son knowingly asks, I won't ever drink it again, will I? More heart-wrenching than that question is a letter the father silently reads himself from his long-gone wife. After emasculating her husband with the opening line of, quote, you can't protect us, unquote, she makes a terse mention of the horrific fate she feels awaits the two of them and their newborn son. Quote, the night he was born, it tore my heart out, so don't ask for sympathy, unquote. Given the boy's age now, it's been a rough near decade since his mother wrote that letter and left him to his father's pipe dream of survival. But they have survived, and the father, unable to carry the burden of his wife's pessimism and realism, at last tears the letter into pieces. Not everything from the pre-apocalyptic past brings good memories. It might be easy to think that Larcenet is so adept at illustrating existential angst and despair that the scant scenes of action would not be his forte. This assumption would be very wrong. When the father and son at last encounter the ominous road agents, looking very much like a band of savages from a Mad Max film, Larcenet conveys every moment both subtle and bracingly dramatic with equal adroitness. Even when the father and son avoid direct encounters with the bands of cannibalistic rapists, every nook and catacomb along the road presents either the slim potential of a can of food or the more ripe potential of a scene of horrors so extreme that they may have been a bridge too far even for Jack Davis and Ghastly Ingalls. Over 2 full pages of panels, Larcenet illustrates a catacomb filled with severed heads, limbs, and the chilling elements of ritualistic torture. He even shows a pair of severed infant hands strung up like decorations, one hand still loosely clutching a pacifier. And among all this gore sit emblems of childhood toys, the most bizarre of which is a Homer Simpson doll bound by layers of twine with cartoon X's over its eyes to create a voodoo totem. It leans grimly against a fractured skull. Soon after, father and son see the roving band of perpetrators. Dozens of them adorned with necklaces of human fingers and femurs. Most horrifyingly, they guide a caravan of blindfolded and bound slaves, emaciated and often missing hands and arms. In truth, they are less slaves than livestock. It is clear that death by one's own hand is vastly preferable to being captured by these devolved mobs of savages. With color no longer reserved for lanterns and soda cans, Larcenet gives the panels with road agents and their prey an eerie salmon tint that portends danger, horror, and hyperviolence. Throughout the book, it is the son who often presses his father when trying to clearly define their own moral stance. Essentially, what differentiates the good guys, father and son, from the bad guys, the road agents, and other bad actors. The boy wants to be assured that they will never eat people, even when they themselves are starving. The father repeatedly states that they won't, because they are indeed, quote, the good guys. This is a moral code the father has instilled into his son, but now under the most unimaginable circumstances, the father must reassure his son of their beliefs when so many others would resort to situational ethics. The boy also asks if yet another group of human livestock they encounter in a root cellar will be killed and eaten. The father, who has tried to shield his son from the darkest horrors of this world, sometimes with white lies, other times with omissions, only answers yes. In struggling to comprehend the rules of the only world he's ever known, the boy is growing up far too fast. His ascendance into manhood would not be marked by high school football games and proms, but rather by his father explaining to his pre-adolescent son how to take his own life in the most expedient way possible should the road agents ever find them. There is only one precious bullet left in the chamber of the revolver. It is no longer for defense, except as a bluff. There's so much more I could say about the storytelling artistry Larcenet displays in every single panel and page of The Road. More about the innumerable emotional subtleties he masterfully illustrates in the faces of his spent and hungry protagonist. More about the fragility, beauty, and hateful hostility of his landscapes, which are characters unto themselves. He delivers page after page of lovingly portrayed vistas of snow and ash, destruction, despair, and the terminally fractured remnants of a civilization. It is hard to imagine any living artist who could have better visualized McCarthy's prose. Obviously, a graphic novel is a different experience than reading prose. No less than Alan Moore has stated that all the term graphic novel accomplished in the 80s was to, quote, grant a license to a lot of people not to ever have to grow up, unquote. Going on to say that most so-called graphic novels were little more than, quote, 12 issues of She-Hulk stapled together, unquote. However, Larcenet's understanding of the emotional core and visual solitude of McCarthy's novel makes the Road's adaptation feel equally as enriching and unsettling as McCarthy's own book. Larcenet's adaptation is surely good enough even to disabuse Alan Moore of his notions and redeem the term graphic novel in those world-weary eyes. But it was not Moore's approval Larcenet was seeking, but rather the titan of American literature whose own journey ended in June 2023 as Larcenet was wrapping up his work. In his humble and reverent letter to Cormac McCarthy, asking for permission to adapt The Road, Larcenet said that he was exhausted from writing his own works and simply wanted to draw. Quote, "The magical part of being an illustrator is to find a silent line to draw with every word," unquote. He claimed no interest in changing McCarthy's story and had made a concerted effort to avoid watching the film adaptation lest he harbor any fealty to it. Larcenet stated, quote, "I didn't write The Road, but I wish I had," unquote. He also wrote that he believed that he was, quote, "up to the task." Indeed, by the final ominous page, filled with another visual abstraction of grim portent that returns us full circle to the opening pages, any remaining doubts as to whether Manu Larcenet was, quote, "up to the task" are gone. Those doubts have been crushed with as much totalitarian finality as the ambitions of the few remaining survivors of the human species doomed to live out their lives on this barren road, paved only with bones, ash, and unwanted memories.